theory of learning. So definitely this is the nature of Gestalt theory. Max Wertheimer is generally considered to be Gestalt's psychology's founding father, and the other pioneers in this field are Queller, Kafka, and Wolfgang. So basically, Gestalt is a German word whose equivalents in English are form, or pattern, or configuration. So Max Wertheimer has explained that the term Gestalt as that the whole is greater than the parts. So how do we understand that? For example, a flower is not just a total of sepals, petals, calyx, corolla, color, honey, and fragrance, but something more than that. And the total of the parts is not equal to the whole. And this is what we call as the Gestalt viewpoint. The total of the parts is not equal to the whole. So according to the view, learning is the organization and reorganization of behavior which arises from the interaction of a maturing organism and its environment. And it is the bringing about through this interaction of new forms of perception, imagination, motor coordination, and other organic behavior. So sudden appearance of the solution is basically called an essential characteristic of what we call insight learning. So a sudden coherent pattern of solution appears at once, and the individual does not perform random activities, but he perceives the situation as a whole and intuitionally reaches the goal through. Basically, we define insight as the perception of relationship between at least three factors: an agent, a goal, and intervening conditions or obstacles. So insight in this sense is often called as the aha or the eureka moment or experience, the flash of understanding which comes to us all of a sudden. Insight, when it occurs, as they claim, is characteristically accompanied by an expression of "I have got it," an exclamation, the eyes light up, the neat brows unravel, the fingers snap, and saying, "Ah, I get it." And the main feature of learning by insight is an estimate of the whole situation and arrange the means in such a way so as to reach the desired goal of a particular individual. So in this sense, the individual discusses within himself all ins and outs of it before acting upon it. And the proponents of Gestalt theory tend to place for more emphasis on the intrinsic organizing capacity in the grain of the individual, and that they emphasize the dynamic interactions of the elements in the entire perceptual field. So basically, if we apply Gestalt theory in education, we can say that Gestalt theory of learning essentially consists in problem solving by understanding the relative position of the elements in the entire perspective or situation. So when a problem arises, it tends to disturb the equilibrium of the organism who seeks a balance, and so the organism. Actually, Gestalt psychology began with the work of German psychologists who were studying the nature of perception. So, what do we mean by that? We are all now well aware that the moving picture is not actually a moving picture at all, but it is just a series of still pictures. So when we watch cinema or anime cartoons, it seems that these pictures are moving. But in reality, these are just series of still pictures connected together. And so our perception is tricked in such a way that we are seeing a movement rather than still pictures. So, the realities of still pictures as flashed on the movie screen become our perception of moving pictures. So, the focal point of this theory is that the fact when two optical stimuli are perceived by the human eye in quick succession, the reaction is one simultaneous patterning. So, Wertheimer called this the phi phenomenon. So out of these observations of perception, there emerge certain principles that have implications for the general nature of learning. One principle is that the human mind gives an organization or pattern to the environmental world revealed to the organism through sense perception. In other words, the mind organizes the things that we see in such a way that it forms a particular organized pattern or theme to which it makes sense out of these individual realities. So, the mind does something to the stimuli from the environment, and that is that the responses are not mechanically automatic because connections that have been formed out are adaptive and good because the mind gives an organization or meaning to the stimuli of the environment. So basically, this theory has been influenced by earlier philosophers like Immanuel Kant and Goethe, both of which are also German philosophers. So, in other words, organization and reorganization are constantly occurring in the organism as it interacts with its environment. So, this activity of organization and reorganization of organism has one of its manifestations, those changes in its responding that we now call learning. So, the proponents of Gestalt theory have mentioned some laws involved in learning. The age at which memory begins is determined chiefly, by the development of a sufficient number of association fibers to bring about recall. And there are different modes of connection or association among precepts and ideas. So the first theory, the principle of Gestalt theory is the law of similarity. According to this law of similarity, it makes the individual to grasp things which are similar. So they are picked out as it were from the total context. So similar ideas and experiences get associated together. An object revives another object which resembles it. For example, seeing a man and remembering an intimate friend by some resemblance in his personal appearance, though you never saw them together in the past. So a photo reminds us of the person when it represents him or her. The second law is the law of proximity. According to this, it makes proximate or near together things to be picked up first, learned as to how many these are among the more distant things. So in other words, perceptual groups are favored according to the nearness of their respective parts. It tends to form groups if they are spaced together. So for instance, The example of a triangle and a circle is enough to illustrate this point. The third law is the law of closure. So the law of closure means that closed areas are more stable and satisfying than the enclosed ones. So closed areas more readily form in groups. So this law also means that when the perception of the situation is incomplete, the individual is not able to solve the problem. So the problem is solved when he or she is able to bring the separate parts of the situation together into a close perceptual figure consisting of the goal and the means of achieving the goal. The fourth one is the law of continuity. So according to this law, it makes the individual to grasp things which are joined together in a string or along the line which constituting a whole rather than grasp together than disconnected, disjoined, or scattered. So in other words, experiences which occur together either simultaneously or in close succession tend towards reviving one another. For example, the perception of a ripe mango suggests the idea of its sweet taste and flavor because they are perceived together in the past. And the law of contrast is it states that a perception or an idea tends to suggest its contrary opposite. So for example, adversity reminds a person of his days of prosperity. So similarly, the heat of the summer of the dry season suggests the cold of the Burr months. Ayan. So in these laws of learning is brought out basically the Gestalt point of view that the organizational capacity of the brain makes to grasp the whole in priority with the parts. Therefore, how do we apply this in education? So keeping in view these principles for learning, the teacher should present all curricular material to his students in the form of a simple, concrete, and patterned units of experience which constitute a whole. So when we discuss things, when we discuss lessons, it is better to form a simple, connected series and patterned units of ideas, of which these ideas can be understood and can form part as a particular whole of a, for example, a specific competency to get or specific skill to develop. So, children should be taught tune or melody rather than separate notes. So, whole dance, buong pagsasayaw, should be taught rather than separate steps, and simple, meaningful sentences should be taught rather than discrete words. So, they should be better taught in its totality or in the idea of a whole meaningful words rather than separate letters or alphabets. For example, the alphabets are not meaningful if we are to study them one by one. Rather, we can see the meaning of the alphabets if we put them together. So that is why we are reading a word, we are reading sentences, we're reading paragraphs, because we're not looking at the letters individually, rather we are looking at them as a whole. That's why we are able to read, and that is one of the components of Gestalt theory. What is the education significance of Gestalt theory? So Gestalt psychology contribution to education lies in its concepts of the organization of stimuli and insight. It claims that the world is organized, it has meaning, and that the child can reach with understanding. He or she has insight. So, arithmetic is not isolated fact, but a system of numbers. History is not names, facts, dates, but rather it is a a conglomeration and continuity of the narration of events forming and trying to come up with the meaning and make sense of what history is, and so to understand our future as well. So it is a sweep of events through time, with one thing leading to or following another. So the child can respond to 3 to 4 because he can add 3 and 4. So learning is basically meaningful. The educators would say this, and Gestalt psychologists and proponents would also say this. So, Gestalt psychology suggests educators to conceive the problems of learning in more comprehensive terms. The teacher should organize the learning situations so that the significant relations emerge and understanding of the material results. So, the learning experiences should be so arranged that the learner discovers and generalizes the relationship for himself. And the subject matter should be organized into larger units or in meaningful wholes. And the concept of unit planning is based on the same. So, the daily lesson plan now is many times fragmentary. It may encourage mere accumulation of facts, principles, data, concepts, and skills. And the student does not get a clear-cut picture of the whole. So, we suggest from the Gestalt point of view, when we create or make daily lesson plan, we are to make a daily lesson plan that is pattern, sequence, and not fragmentary. So, the students may get confused if if we are just teaching skills in a fragmentary way. So they will not see the significance, and they will not appreciate how these facts would lead to a total understanding of a particular concept or idea or skill, so to speak. So when there is no clear connection between act and goal, when the parts are presented singly so that no view of the whole is possible, when the level of performance lies far beyond the pupil's equipment and experience, blundering occurs, and blundering is time consuming actually and in itself fruitless. But with properly graded steps and with adequate preparation of expectancy from stage to stage, this blundering can be reduced to a minimum. And so, there are two important ideas with regard to the presentation of material from the Gestalt point of view. Firstly, where possible, one should use virtual presentations, outlines, maps, charts, graphs. In short, those devices which permit a survey of the whole problem, which being out configurationally and relational factors simultaneously, presenting what otherwise would remain discrete, have special value actually. So the child who is learning colors finds it difficult to dissociate the film of color from the object itself, and he does not see the blue to which the teacher points but the dress itself. Secondly, there is a clear distinction between a psychological and a logical order of presentation. So if we want to teach something, the logical process will be to start with the smallest unit and from there elaborate the whole framework of that thing. Example, if we are to teach subelectronic particles, then we start with electron atoms, the molecules, and then matter. So the abstract conceptual items with which science works are really the last items to become knowledge. So if this is correct, one should begin with the living totality and reach the last of all the abstract formulations, or the what we call the unitary process. And so a major point in this learning is that initial insight is only instinctive and automatic. And this insight can be brought about through what we call maturation, experience, and good arrangement of the environmental forces. The teacher must postpone the task until circumstances are more propitious or appropriate to proceed. For example, the child is unable to appreciate a poem. No amount of analysis into rhymes, schemes, grammatical constructions, similes will supply if the circumstances are not good enough to continue, and if the presentation of materials were not presented in such a way that the student will appreciate that each part will lead to, to an understanding of a particular concept as a whole. So, details must always follow a general grasp or vague emotional insight, since it is under the left one that perceptual fields take shape and configurationally relationships appear. Motivations is of first importance. But motivation is here much more than interest, more than something or impelling stimulation. It is more of the nature of expectancy, a goalward orientation, an awareness of all but complete relationships. Therefore, this type of learning from the point of view of Gestalt theory is very important in education because it discards memorizer type of learning. It does not consume much time and it emphasizes upon meaningfulness, organization, and interpretation of the lesson. Here, the individual is engaged in problem solving attitude. It encourages reasoning, develops thinking, and trains imagination by the creative activity of the child. So, learning by insight can be cultivated. Thus, the teacher should emphasize it by encouraging, helping, and guiding the child. This aspect of teaching is supported by the pragmatic philosophy of John Dewey and also the creative activity or what we call the Dalton plan or the project method of other social scientists in education. So I hope you're able to learn something about Gestalt theory, and I hope you're able to take down notes of the important concepts of what Gestalt theory is. See you soon on our next episode.